Wittenberg's efforts to both implement and sustain the Green Dot program on their campus. I know many of you are doing work in this space already with the Green Dot program or at various stages of that process, or some of you are also using other bystander intervention type programs and are listening in just to learn about the experiences of another campus here in Ohio. Whatever the reason, I'm glad you're here today. A couple housekeeping items before we get started. First of all, if you have not been able to mute your phone or your application from your end of things, please do so. I've been muting them, you all on my end. That just impacts the ability of background noise in your area to be heard by everybody and possibly disrupt the recording of this webinar today. So I am recording it for others. And also for any of you, should you want a copy of this webinar later today, simply at the conclusion of the webinar, email me, Carrie Solar, directly, and I will be happy to forward you a copy of the recording today for you to share with others or to listen in on again following the presentation. Another note, if you have a cell phone or a tablet or anything that is near the computer or phone from which you are participating in this webinar today, I ask that you move it away from those items if possible. In the past, we have had some feedback generated by people having those electronic devices near the computer or phone from which you're listening and participating, and that disrupts the whole presentation as well. So if you could just be sure to keep those items separate, that would be great. Throughout the presentation today, normally I ask you to do questions in the chat box on the screen. I'm going to ask you to do that again, but you could feel free to direct those directly to Kevin and Gwen. You should see them. They're one joint group on the chat box today. Because there's two presenters, they have a better opportunity for one of them to keep track while the other's talking, whereas when we have a single presenter, I tend to monitor the chat box to help the presenters stay in their zone. But they will be happy to answer questions that you may have about their efforts, both during the course of this webinar today, and I'm sure you could also contact them after the conclusion of the webinar should you have questions that arise from today's presentations or any discussions you may be having back on your home campus. But thank you again for joining us today and participating in this webinar. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Kevin Carey and Gwen Owen at Wittenberg University to talk about their Green Dot.
Thank you very much, Carrie, for having us here today. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad that you took some time during lunch to join us this afternoon to learn a little bit about how we would describe as starting and sustaining our Green Dot initiative here on campus. We do want to make sure that, like Carrie said, if you do have questions throughout, we will try to make sure they fit right in with the conversation we're having around maybe the strategy we're talking about to ensure that we're keeping your questions answered throughout that fit the conversation that we're currently having. My name's Kevin. I serve as our Associate Director of Student Involvement and primarily work with our campus organizations, our student activities, and our orientation and leadership programs here on campus.
Hi, and my name is Gwen Owen. I'm the Director of Student Conduct and Deputy Title IX Coordinator.
Both Gwen and I were fortunate enough to be part of the inaugural implementation team of Green Dot here at Wittenberg. Per our Ohio Department of Higher Education grant that we received for changing campus culture, which was an opportunity we were thankful for, and so both Gwen and I serve as co-coordinators of that for our campus.
So obviously we have the overview. We're going to talk about the implementation timeline, some of our strategies in more detail, as well as recommend any suggestions, recommendations and suggestions for the future, and then obviously we're going to answer questions as we go and then also leave some time at the end. But just to let you know a little bit more about us, obviously we're a small private liberal arts campus. We have about 1,800 students that we work with here. And something I think that is not unique to us is that there is no centralized prevention office or prevention education program here on our campus. So we all pick up little pieces of that and kind of come together and work together as a team in order to make prevention happen. And then we also have a women's center here on our campus who does take on a large lifting of that prevention message. again, what we're going to talk about today is this is what's worked for us, and how we've implemented the Green Dot strategy. We have followed it pretty closely, as we've signed and sworn to say we would do. After you go through your training, they do ask that you maintain the standard that they set forward. And we've done a really good job of doing that with a few minor tweaks here and there. And I think that it's enhanced our overall prevention and allowed us to connect well to our students. So I know some people on this webinar are people who have folks already trained on campus, or you have no one trained on campus and you're looking at trying to figure out where do we even start to try to bring this to campus. So we're just going to kind of talk about what we've done, what we're doing, and hopefully give you some insight and ideas to help, you know, either sustain your program or keep it going as well. Okay, so a little bit about our implementation timeline. Like Kevin mentioned, we started with the ODHE grant, which we ended up starting to write in 2015. In between 2015 and 2017, actually both my position and Kevin's position was turned over, so we were both new to Wittenberg, and we're not part of the original writing team, but we were able to utilize the grant that we had gotten, and through that we were able to send 4 people to go to training. Luckily, Ohio State was hosting a training in November of 2018, so 4 of us went to that training. Once we were trained, we came back to campus and started working through our strategy and figuring out what we wanted to do. So we started with tabling and doing surveys for early adopters, and I'll talk a little bit about what that survey entailed a little bit later. But the early adopters from the Green Dot language are people who are the most influential on your campus. So we not only utilize the students, but also the faculty and staff to try to identify who those early adopters were. We looked at not only the student population for early adopters, but also who are our influential faculty and staff members, and those were the people we wanted to get on board right away as well. And then once you kind of reach your critical mass, then you're allowed to go to a little bit shorter training. Green Dot calls it an overview talk, and we began those in the fall of this year. And we started to reach out to specific groups. We utilized our fall training timeline as far as reaching out specifically to RA candidate or RA staff members for the coming year, our orientation assistants, peer leaders, so students who kind of had an elevated leadership role, and we worked with those student leaders this fall.
One of the things that, and Carrie can know this because I probably bugged her a bunch when we received the grant, and Gwen and I kind of fielded it knowing that there was some transition of staff, is that those grant opportunities that Carrie sends out are vital for, I think, the lifeblood of these being able to, you know, manifest on a campus. And so any chance you can to apply for any grant availability as they come available, we would highly encourage that to do so. We know that without that, this wouldn't have been feasible for our campus. I think financially speaking, we know that this would be hard to build into a budget, knowing that it would cost anywhere between $8,000 to $10,000 to do a training, to send people to a training in Virginia at Altruistic, where Green Dot's headquartered. And so we know that that's a critical part to this process, is that funding received for that grant. And you probably heard us talk about our timeline being extremely extensive, 3 years to get where we are now. Yes, there was a lot of failure within that and some missteps, but I think that the beautiful thing about Green Dot is every step forward is going to impact us student or start to change that campus culture. And that's the piece that I think Gwen and I and the rest of the implementation team had to hang on to as we were kind of building out what that strategy would look like on campus. We utilized our trained, can you go back for me, Carrie, real quick? Thank you. So we utilized our trained Green Dot facilitators, so the 4 of us, to talk about our connections on campus, knowing we came from a variety of areas, and we're going to talk a little bit about that here in a second, but we really used the social clout that we had built on campus with our connections to students, faculty, and staff to get them to come to those early adopter trainings. It was the individual outreach, it was the phone call, it was the text message that really got those people to be able to remember that there was a training coming up, that they were, you know, nominated as a respected and respectful person in our community to kind of be part of this inaugural rollout of the strategy. Throughout our presentation, we're going to give you some reflection questions like this for you to kind of write down and talk about with you or your team of people who might be implementing or considering implementing this. So we kind of wanted you to take away from this, like, what is that realistic timeline for your campus to implement this Green Dot strategy? While you might be at a larger campus like Bowling Green or University of Dayton, or a smaller campus like ours, or Denison or Kenyon, timelines might look different depending upon what other prevention education exists on your campus. And so really think about how that's realistically going to play out with the buy-in you might get or not get from people when you start this process after being trained. So our implementation team was critical for us. We're going to share some of our failures along our journey here. One of the ones that I think we learned as we were transitioning into rolling this out on campus was that our predecessor who was managing this grant had done a campus-wide application to faculty and staff for people who wanted to be trained. She was also doing overview talks at that same time to build energy around campus for this initiative, but was doing it on her own as a trained Green Dot facilitator. The application didn't garnish people the way that I think they had hoped it would. When we came on, we really started to think about those key faculty and staff on our campus that we wanted to identify that were intentional. So you'll see that we have someone from conduct, involvement, our police division, and athletics serving on that training team, which is hitting at several key populations of students that we know are culture shifters and culture changers, which we found was the key word there is an intentionality behind who you select. And reaching out to that person and having that conversation versus doing a call out for people to go to a training, we found to be much more successful for us.
Yeah, so you really want to look at, one of the other things that we did was we spanned 4 different generations with our group. So we had someone in their 20s, someone in their 30s, someone in their 40s, and someone in their 50s, which I think that gave, when our person in their 20s who had just recently graduated was giving his examples of a time when he had intervened or didn't intervene, it was very real to the students, and I think that had definitely a stronger impact versus, you know, if, you know, I'm in my 40s and I tell my story, like, you know, they're not going to really connect as well to that. So we had a lot of diversity in our age groups, in our offices, as well as we were trying to find people that they didn't think that prevention messaging would necessarily come from. And then again, we'll talk a little bit why we use conduct in the police division in a few slides. But, you know, really what we want you to think about is who are your trained people and who do they connect with socially on your campus, and how can you utilize that to help strengthen your message. We really, when we were getting going, utilized our relationships with our faculty, staff, and students that we had already built over different, you know, interactions over the year and years to get those first people trained to kind of move forward and get out the gate. So again, we really kind of used our campus climate data to help inform who our populations we were going to kind of look at. So our data indicated that Greek students and student athletes were populations who were a little more at risk. So we kept that in mind as we were starting to invite our first round of students to our intervention trainings. Also, we worked to connect our police and conduct office. Obviously, we were part of the training team, and we were kind of at a mid-range as far as trusting the process, trusting the police division in our data. So we wanted to try to give them an opportunity to see those folks outside of, I'm in a Title IX process, what is going on. So we felt that connecting those folks through a prevention message was important. Also, we asked some bystander and intervention questions on our survey, and through that, it came back that our students are interveners, and that a bystander intervention program would be very positive and well accepted on our campus. So if you're getting a message that, your students don't want to intervene, they would rather do other things instead, well, you should really look at that message to see if Green Dot would be the right thing, or, is there a different intervention method that would work better for your campus? So our students were very much, they like to intervene, and they expected their peers to intervene as well. So we felt that those things helped connect us to Green Dot in particular.
Can I add something real quick?
Yeah.
Something just popped into my mind that also might be helpful. So as you're looking at that data, and if you're starting to get to the point where we are as a campus where we're focused on those overview talks for subpopulations, if you're able to isolate your data in your campus climate survey to specific populations and demographics based upon what you ask in that demographics section, that might be a really helpful tool to also start to identify those key groups who might have some variance in those bystander intervention questioning, where there's lower levels of learning occurring or there's less likelihood of response in intervening. I think that's where that campus climate data is critical, and it's not just used to produce a report. And if you're sitting in your, if you have Title IX advisory meetings or prevention meetings with groups of people on campus, give space for that dialogue to happen. And if students are in the room, we find when we have our students in the room during our Title IX advisory meetings, they're giving us the populations that need that messaging because they're being honest and open with us. These are the same students that also were early adopters in the Green Dot program. And so we're finding that they're the ones helping us digest this campus climate data a little bit in a practical and realistic way. So encouraging you all to think about how you utilize that data in those spaces, even down to how do I even know what targeted groups are maybe not receiving the message of bystander intervention in the way that we would hope they would on campus.
Yeah, so again, we want you to think about what does your campus climate data say about the student experience, as well as what populations would you find most helpful targeting and getting the message out, as far as being influencers and being willing to carry the message.
You will hear Gwen and I talk about pretty frequently that just doing an open call for sessions, putting some posters up, sending some campus emails out about come to our Green Dot overview talk is not successful for students, nor is it a successful strategy for us when it comes to our faculty and staff. We did a training this past fall for our faculty and staff, and while 6 more people are now trained on the Green Dot strategy and are going to be better at intervening and incorporating that into their classrooms and their teams that they coach, 6 is not something that we found beneficial for an hour and a half of time in a way that we had been not as successful. That last summer, we actually chose the option of doing one day in June, 2 sessions, morning and afternoon, and we're able to train 44 of our faculty and staff at 22 at each session. So when you think about your timeline and engaging that first critical mass of that first early adopter process for your faculty and staff, and then reaching some of those targeted groups of faculty and staff, the one-day model approach for faculty and staff when they're not maybe as busy teaching and or coaching or planning activities, events, doing conduct cases for humans, that summer day is critical if you're able to incorporate that in your schedule. We utilize our staff and our faculty, and I think even more so our coaches, knowing we have a campus with about 40% plus athletic identified students, to help us build our group-based trainings right now. We've been able to do a track team training, which you'll hear a little bit more in the student targeted outreach population section of our presentation. But our faculty and staff were truly the ones that gave us the access to some of those key populations, especially our resident advisors, our orientation leaders, our tutors, and our peer mentors on campus, building it into their training schedules because the faculty and staff came to that training in the summer, they saw the investment, they then realized that they can incorporate that into their pre-existing trainings for those positions that are servicing our students in many ways across campus. So how do you ensure that your key faculty and staff who are connected to the students, that's key there, know their attendance is critical to making campus culture change? Once again, we're fortunate to be at a smaller campus, so I feel like this might be a little easier in the sense that our relationships are clearly defined in more ways, so we're able to interact with faculty in a different capacity, knowing we're serving on committees with them, and we're walking past them, we're dialoguing with them, we know their names, their kids and other people's kids across faculty and staff are going to school together in our smaller community, and so we know that that's easier to informally dialogue with. But the connection to students is key here, we believe. If you have a bunch of people who are behind the scenes and working less connected to students, are you going to be able to utilize the faculty and staff to engage those targeted student populations and reach your critical mass for early adopters in the student realm? So Gwen's going to tell you a little bit about our early adopter process.
So what we did for our early adopter process, and these are people who are supposedly our most influential faculty, staff, and students. We did a tabling, I think pretty standard. We targeted our academic buildings and outside of our food area during high traffic times. So in our survey, we asked 5 questions. In particular, they were focused on, out of the students here, name the individuals whose opinions are most valued. They may or may not be your friend. Who do you want to go hang out with? Again, it's kind of a different question, but we're trying to find who the students looked up to and who would kind of rise to this level of being an influencer in a social situation that maybe us as faculty and staff wouldn't necessarily identify. We also asked who were the most respected people you know. And then we asked some of the same things about professors and staff, who's most respected and who's well-liked. So we targeted those different areas. We asked students to write down 3 people in each area if they had that. And we compiled an email list based on those recommendations, and that was who we really started reaching out to on an individualized basis. Some of the other things that I thought was interesting that we did that seemed to work better, rather than the email coming from just me or one of the people on the implementation team, we took turns sending the same email to the group, inviting them to come. So for people who maybe identified more with myself, they would maybe take a moment to look at it a little more closely, whereas when Kevin sent it out, the people he's worked more closely with took some time to look at it. And so each time we did that, we kind of got a different group of people to sign up. So I think that was an important part of the process.
So we also utilized some of our early adopters after that first initial training with 9 students to have them actually reach out to other students who are on that list in their group me's, in their organizations, to do some essentially shoulder tapping, like, hey, did Gwen or Kevin email you about going to Green Dot? I just went. It was wonderful. Let me tell you what it is. Just like we know the Green Dot messaging tells them to do, is going out and telling them in their 30-second elevator pitch, what is Green Dot? And they, of course, said, well, I'm glad you asked, and shared that with them. And that got us to have an even larger training that second time we hosted our second 3-hour early adopter bystander intervention training for those students.
Again, as we moved into our subpopulation outreach, our open invite sessions to, emails to all campus students, faculty, staff, those just didn't work. So we went back and relied on our social clout as administrators, and then we asked our students who were trained to use their social clout and recommend other people sign up for their trainings as well. And that's, really kind of what helped continue to propel the program forward and reach that, I think, Tier 2 level student in particular, because, we always have those really eager students who will do any training and love to participate, but it's like, how do you move on past that group? So we really utilized that first group to help get the second group in the door. Again, we specifically reached out to leaders from our groups that we also felt needed some training and would be open to the training. And then we started offering our training sessions during the group predetermined meeting times. So if we knew that, our Greek organizations meet Sunday night and have chapter, then we go ahead and say we'll be available during that time. So we're kind of meeting them where they already are and know that we can get our message out. So that's also been helpful as well. One of our unique partnerships, kind of out of the box thinking, were our students here do the community service as part of graduation. So they actually go into our local community and do 27 hours of service with a site. I actually know the person who works in setting up those sites pretty well, and so after talking with her about the Green Dot in our program, she asked me to come in and do a quick little introduction at the start of the year to all the sites. I overviewed Title IX, some of the resources that were available to students, and specifically highlighted Green Dot. And then the community partners were kind of really interested in, what is this Green Dot thing? So we ended up being able to work with her to do a lunch series where we came in and were able to present our overview talk to some of our community service partner sites. Again, this is a place where our students are going and interacting, where maybe the site, the host that hosts the students would be able to see maybe changes in behavior, some questioning behaviors, maybe students uncomfortable. So we felt it was important to not only give them the resources, but also the tools to intervene as a bystander as well. So that our community partners really enjoyed that, and we're excited. They also wanted us to maybe come to their organizations and present as well. So, we've talked a little bit about that. Again, really kind of looking at who are your groups who work with students in high-risk or high-touch areas. What are the top 5 student groups or communities you need to outreach for your overview talks? And who off campus interacts mostly with your student population. Those would all be good areas to tap into. I know some other schools kind of reach out to different bars or clubs, that type of thing, that are close to their campus and do trainings with those folks. That doesn't really make as much sense for us here. We have very limited options. So that wasn't a population we could look to, but this community service partners were definitely one where we were able to make an impact.
And one Gwen and I are currently thinking about and how this would unfold is our fraternity Sorority Life chapter advisors and our student organization advisors and volunteers who might not be faculty and staff on this campus, but are frequently interacting with our students. And so if you're on a campus where you have student organizations and their advisors are part-time, potentially paid staff, or are volunteers from the community, or our representation of fraternity and sorority organizations. We find those people to be important to access, and I know, speaking from the student involvement lens, that chapter advisor and chapter and organization advisor training sometimes feel redundant. This is a nice way to freshen that up, is giving them a little bit of green dot and something that's a little different and challenging their thinking around areas that they might not have thought that they could be really impacting in that culture shift and addressing individual concerns and managing issues that they see that are starting to encroach upon their organization's membership. And so we find that to be a population we're kind of currently seeking out as a subpopulation as well that might be a little out of the box. Do you want to hit next, Carrie, please? So like the green dot strategy tells you, is that marketing is key. If you read the marketing section of your green dot training guide, it tells you that the blitz approach is critical. So when you're doing that early adopter training, you put a lot of stuff up while you're recruiting people to reach your critical mass, and as soon as you train those people, you take it all down. But how can you keep that brand and that identity and that messaging alive on your campus post your training with those early adopters? And what are some things that you can think about as ways for faculty and staff and students to be representing the brand of Green Dot? We're thankful that the organization provides many resources in graphic identity and language usage and pre-designed posters, but it's also important to kind of incorporate it into your university's brand and voice to make it feel familiar and make it feel connected and interwoven into the fabric of your university's marketing. And so we think the action events are important for that first introduction to campus of what Green Dot actually is. So our first action event was outdoors in a central part of our campus where we actually had people stop by. We told them what Green Dot was, and we asked them to write one down on a green dot, and then we filled in and chalked in a circular part of our campus with green chalk as a representation that we will intervene when we see something that is related to power-based personal violence or in other spaces where we know we just simply need to intervene. And so we kind of talked through that with students. That for us was critical in just using the voice of Green Dot and getting that to students who had no clue what it was. We didn't see students stopping by the table who had already been through the training. It was the student that was completely clueless of what this giant green dot thing was that they were walking over in their path on campus. And I know many of you have parts of your campuses or your organization spaces that you can really utilize as a way to do that really initial action event. Our spring action event is going to be connected to spring break, knowing that that's a space where we think that our students who are going to the destination places for their spring break as a way for them to carry that message with them. So we're going to be attaching some intervention messaging and some bystander pieces to little small packs of sunscreen, knowing that they're mostly going to sunny places and enjoying themselves. And so we think we're tying that to a specific event or something we know our students are going to be doing. That should show you from the first one that's very base level to the second one that's a little more specific to a population of students that we're trying to target. This might be also a good time when you're thinking about marketing to think about collaborating with other groups. So we've talked about utilizing some of our key student organizations to actually staff that table, who have trained individuals, who can talk about Green Dot, who can represent the brand, but also as a collaborator and as a stakeholder in that Green Dot messaging. We look at our early adopters on this campus truly as brand ambassadors. And you'll see as in your Green Dot materials, there's a space where you're to build out an implementation team where there are people who are serving in that marketing and that brand capacity. We believe our early adopters are that for our campus. And so all of our early adopters have a Wittenberg W on the front with a giant green dot on the back. Nowhere does it say Green Dot, but they frequently tell us that they get asked what that logo is, and so it gives them a chance to practice and share that messaging in proactive spaces and making proactive green dots on our campus. We also try to ensure that that's put in other places on campus, and so similar to that of the Safe Zone sticker some of campuses have for LGBTQ+ inclusion and people who have gone through that training, to be advocates and ally for the LGBTQ plus community. We do the same for Green Dot, so our faculty and staff and our students have laptop stickers and window stickers to put in spaces, so people know that that's a space that they might be able to talk about a hypothetical situation. We love hypotheticals here when students want to talk to us in the world of mandated reporting, and so that's been really a great way for us to feel like we're getting a pulse on what students are actually doing when it means to intervene in the spaces that they're being social. We want you to think about what are ways you keep the initial critical mass engaged in outreach, awareness, and solicitation of those training sessions. So I think about the Justin on our campus who is an OA, who was one of our first trained students, who also is one of our Tiger Health sex educators. How can we position him to be successful in supporting the Green Dot message in spaces where he has social clout? In his fraternity where he shared that, and then we did a subpopulation overview talk with his fraternity, or in spaces where we needed some of those orientation assistants to step up to be trained, he put a nice long personal video message in the group me. So utilizing them as truly the brand ambassador because they believe in that messaging are kind of the ways we want to challenge you all to think about going past the poster, going past the social media, thinking really about that word of mouth and the ambassador style messaging that you can utilize from people that were your initial trained students, faculty, and staff.
So next we want to talk a little bit about if you're trained and not implementing, because we know that, we went to training and some of the folks that we sat around the tables with really haven't been able to get this off the ground, kind of what to do and where to go. So I think, again, you're looking at who the unexpected messengers are and how do they connect to the student community. So maybe if you relook at that implementation team and say, okay, well, who else might we need to get trained to kind of get this moving a little bit faster? Mm-hmm. Other than, sitting down around the table and saying, okay, well, let's try to get this going again. Maybe the right people aren't at the table, and that's okay. So really try to identify who those people might be. Also, if how are you utilizing the people who are already trained? Are you utilizing those people effectively? So, we like to kind of just set a meeting and say, okay, we're going to talk about Green Dot, and we're going to, pick 3 to 5 different dates, and, we're going to reserve some time and hopefully make a training happen or do an action event. So we are reserving the time and maybe the place, and not necessarily having the population just yet, but then utilizing that to kind of fill in the back. Mm-hmm. So it's okay to set the goals and the dates, even if you don't necessarily know what's going to be in there. Mm-hmm. Especially at the beginning, we had time reserved and set aside for different training dates. And sometimes we did just have to cancel those because, we had one person signed up, and that's really not going to be effective. But, when we got those 6 people for that first session, it was like, okay, even though 6 isn't the most ideal number, we're going to go anyway because we want to start getting this message out to some people. Mm-hmm. And maybe those 6 will tell, 3 more people each, and then, our trainings would build and build. And luckily that is what happened for us. Those 6 people who showed up to our first faculty staff training were very 6 influential people, and they were, I think, able to rally the support mm-hmm. that helped us get going. So sometimes it's making that little snowball and rolling it down the hill and seeing how it builds over time.
We also want you to think about if you're on a campus where you've reached your critical mass per the percentage model that Green Dot requires. For us, that was 15 students or 16 students. That took us the course of one whole semester to get 16 students through that 3-hour, really 3.5-hour training. And I can tell you, between myself, Gwen, and Lee, our lieutenant of our police division on our implementation team, it was frustrating. And I think that kind of energy can really spiral you down and take away from that snowball Gwen was talking about, and we can really easily not build it over time, and so we really had to think critically about how do we just keep persistent, focused energy around this and keep trying. And so really think about post that, what do you use your early adopters for? Define that and share that with them. So you can do that early on, and make sure you tell them in the immediacy. And then really starting those target populations. We have a model that we like to use that we kind of rely on our own individual selves as an outreach. So both Gwen, Lee, and I, we're down to 3 trained people. We've lost our athletic representation. And so we're down to the 3 of us, but we each picked 2 different populations, teams, organizations, groups, identities of people that we wanted to individually reach out to that we know we had connections to this semester. And we're seeing great success in that thus far, already having done a training for the track team, one coming up for our field hockey team, but also knowing that our fraternity and sorority community is going to get kind of a prevention summit this year, which is a little different for our community, and we're going to be able to do an overview talk for around 10 members of each of our 11 organizations. So that's, I can't do quick math. Is that 110, 111? 10 times 11. Wow, math is hard today. That's fine. I don't have to do it often. That's why we have Excel and calculators. That might be the millennial in me speaking. So we are really looking at ways to kind of meet the students where they are, but also utilize us as individual outreach. So please consider thinking about how your individual team has that clout and can kind of separate and then come back together.
So again, some of the takeaways, after you're trained, it's going to take a little bit of time to actually get it launched to students, faculty, and staff. And be patient with yourself and your team. It's okay. You'll probably stumble a little bit, but just, keep trying to move forward and try to remain as flexible as possible because I think you'll be able to roll with those punches as they come, as you're able to do that. And, having that diversely trained team, that would be really helpful. It gives students the ability to connect with someone. If we each can influence a few people to come to that first training, and we all come from different areas, that gets a few more people at the table. And I think that's what's really helped us get going and be successful. Mm-hmm. And, I think Green Dot really talks a lot about this, unexpected messengers, and it really is true. We've seen that when students are surprised who cares about this particular message, they have a little more investment or are more interested in it.
We also know that you might be on here from a campus or a group or organization that has a specific number of people. The first thing that I think Gwen and I want to share, and something that we were skeptical about at the beginning of that, is that if you're a small institution, you can sustain this. We haven't had to put a lot of financial resources into continuing this program post-grant, and it's been extremely successful, and it hasn't cost us a lot of money. And I think institutions thinking about resources and resource allocation want to see high impact practices with minimal financial resources outputted. And so we think that this is key for us as a small institution. So for those of you from small institutions on here today, please know that it is feasible. Institutions that have small or larger populations of people, your timelines are going to look different. Our timeline we're sharing with you might look very different than what you've experienced or what you might experience. And so patience is key, and we know, like we tell the students, it takes a lot of small actions to make big change. And so change doesn't come after one semester of training. But the beautiful thing is that you can start to see maybe some results from conversations and stories that are shared, and also your campus climate data. The other key is if you read on prevention education, we know that there is an oversaturation level that you can reach on your campus per the size of your campus and those you train. Know when you've reached that point and you need to dial it back. You can still market what Green Dot is, keep an action event going, but you don't necessarily need to continue to train. Know when you've done enough and you can dial back a little bit so that there can be what we call a purposeful pause. So we want to leave some time for you all to put some questions in that chat box or things that have come up in our conversation that might be helpful for us to share. We also do have our contact information there if something comes up afterwards.
Have you guys had any questions come in on your end directly to you that you might want to share with the group, or?
Nothing specifically, no. More information than questions.
Yeah, no problem. Any questions for Kevin or Gwen? Give it another minute or so. Okay. Go ahead.
Like we said, we are both happy and always available, not just to email, but pick up the phone and talk. And by all means, we know that we are not doing this probably the best across America, but I think we've felt very successful and proud of the work that we've been able to do here with this, knowing program implementation here can be difficult at times. And so we do have a question. How difficult have you found it to keep faculty engaged?
I think the initial outreach was probably where we had our biggest stumbling blocks in getting our faculty to our training table. But once we were able to get that first group trained, they enjoyed themselves and then went back and told colleagues, like, oh, this was fun, you should do this. And that we found to be very helpful. We haven't reached the point yet where we've seen our faculty disengage. You know, I think that's probably always that's always a possibility, but you know, I think we're still in the point where, again, it's pretty new. We've had it out for about a year now, and our faculty have been interested to be involved.
And one thing Gwen and I have talked a lot about is how can we take some of that stuff from that faculty toolkit you're given and maybe break it up a little bit and maybe send a reminder like, remember a year ago you were trained to be, you know, a supporter of the Green Dot strategy. We want to make sure you would keep this with you. Here's 3 suggestions we'd like to challenge you to do to make a proactive Green Dot in your classes, on your teams, working with whoever you work with. And so I think that's the little ways. It takes, 30 minutes to sit and draft up an email that's purposeful and intentional like that. And so that's a good way to keep, you know, the messaging to them clear. The other question we have is there was we had mentioned the 3.5-hour training a couple of times. So the difference between what we were talking about is the 3.5-hour training is the bystander intervention training that you lead for the students in that initial early adopter rollout, and then the 75 to 90 minute is that overview talk once you've met your critical mass that you focus more on. Certainly someone could request that 3.5-hour bystander intervention training afterwards, but we find ourselves having only done that about 3 to 4 times in that first 6-month period. That 8-hour training you're referencing is probably more of when you were learning to be a facilitator of the Green Dot strategy. We spent 4 full 8-hour days learning how to facilitate those as a trained Green Dot facilitator.
So one interesting thing is Wittenberg also has the Step Up Bystander Intervention program on our campus as well. And we've actually found that the 2 programs coexist pretty nicely because a lot of our students had received Step Up Bystander training first, and then not only were we reiterating kind of the philosophies and some of the intervention strategies they learned through that with Green Dot, but then we were curtailing it specifically through our examples and the work we did in the workshops on power-based personal violence. So then they were seeing, okay, this is how this applies to that area. So we've been able to manage both at the same time. Obviously, with that, we've been intentional at, what group has received Step Up, when did they receive it, is that a group that we should be looking at for Green Dot now versus, if they just received it, when, should we wait a little bit and then kind of hit them with the Green Dot message a little bit later. So it's been, obviously it's something that we consider as we look at our target groups of when they've been Step Up trained.
Awesome. I'm not seeing any additional questions come through. Have you guys seen any more come through on your end?
Nope.
All right. Well, Kevin and Gwen, thank you so much for sharing your experience with everybody today. As they've shared, their contact information is up on the screen. Please feel free to copy that down, and if you have questions for them after this, or as you work to implement your Green Dot program on your campus, I'm sure they would be happy to work with each of you and share their experiences or their thoughts on that process. But again, thank you so much for your time today. Truly appreciate your sharing your insights and for being flexible rescheduling from back in November.
Of course.
Yeah. Really appreciate it. So thank you for your efforts there at Wittenberg. Right. Thank you for all of you out there doing the work, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thanks.